Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending our session with Halton Region, Ontario. Halton Region is going to present today on encampments in our communities, balancing compassion and action. I just want to point out that in the written program, if anyone is going by the written program versus the app, there is an error. There's indicating another encampment session for this room at the same time. It's been moved to tomorrow. So I recommend you look at the app for the correct information, or you can ask one of us with a red lanyard and we can let you know where that session's being hosted tomorrow. So today, when we get to question period, just want to let everybody know we'll be using a microphone. This session's recorded, including the question session. And if it's spoken in the microphone, it will get recorded. If it's just shouted out across the room, it'll get missed. So we don't want to miss anybody's important questions because it often creates quite great dialogue. So I will introduce our team here today from Halton Region. We have Fiaza sitting next to me, Fiaza Badi. We have Dylan Dench. We have Laura Schnaub, and we have Sarah Rudal. Sorry if I mispronounce. I'm terrible pronouncing names. Oh, it's brutal. Speaking of which, I'm going to start us off today with the Montreal Land Acknowledgement. And I've been practicing the proper pronunciations for this land acknowledgement when I read it for my first time yesterday, realizing I didn't know how to pronounce the names well. And that's always a horrible feeling. So let's hope my practice during the evening serves me well here today. There's still some seats up front. There's a couple up front here if anyone wants to come up and sit down that you're sitting in the back. Maybe raise your hand if there's an empty seat beside you. We have quite a few people standing. So if you want to sit, it's an hour and a half session, so you might want to sit, just to let you know. Okay, thanks everyone. We okay? Okay. Sounds good. Perfect. Great, thank you. Okay, we'd like to begin with our land acknowledgement that 2025 National Conference on Ending Homelessness, the CAH conference, is taking place on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganagahiga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather here today. Janjagay, colonially known as Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples from coast to coast to coast. I am going to turn the microphone over to the lovely Halton Region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I think we were expecting some interest, but this is awesome. Thank you so much for using your morning to come to our session. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Fiaza, and I work with the region of Halton. And I also just want to give the opportunity for our amazing panel to introduce themselves as well, so you know who is who when they're up here speaking.
I'm Dylan. I'm a Halton Regional Police Officer. I work in the Community Mobilization Unit, and we deal predominantly with unhoused individuals in our region.
And my name's Laura. I'm the manager of our outreach team.
And I'm Sarah Ruddle. I'm also a police officer with Halton Regional Police, and I work in the Community Mobilization Unit along with Dylan.
Thank you so much. I really hope you're enjoying the conference so far. And I say that not having anything to do with how amazing the conference has been, but I truly hope that you're enjoying it. I also just wanted to mention that I'm a little under the weather. I don't have my kids, so I partied a little too hard over the past couple of days. No, I'm kidding. I'm a little under the weather, so I might be coughing, and I apologize for that ahead of time. We're gathered here today because we'd love to talk. We're talking about our approach to working with encampments within the region of Halton. and how our approach has tremendously been successful for us in dealing with homelessness and unsheltered folks who are living in encampments within Halton Region, but through a lens of extreme compassion and empathy. And with the level of collaboration, as you can see with Halton Regional Police Services, as well as our outreach team in the community, that has proved to be quite effective. And so what we're hoping that through this session today, you're going to learn how there is tremendous power in partnership. And we hope that we'll be able to communicate that to you effectively. And that working together, we can really create the change that we want to see within our communities. Every community is different. And I think together, what we've realized is that we understand the needs within our community, the very unique, the very specific needs within our communities. Not only the needs of the unsheltered or those who are living in encampments, but also the needs of our community, of our neighbors, of our residents, of our business partners, or businesses within the region of Halton, and how we've come together to address and ensure that everyone is being heard. So we're hoping to spark some dialogue today and have a really robust conversation following our presentation. So Halton Region, at a glance, for those of you who don't know, we're located in southern Ontario, west of Toronto and Peel, which are two larger neighboring regions, and a little east of Hamilton, which is another large neighboring region, if you're familiar with southern Ontario. The region of Halton oversees 4 municipalities, and within the region of Halton itself is considered a very affluent community. And so what do we mean by that? The average, according to Stats Canada, the average income of a household was between $140,000 and $160,000 in 2021. And so you can only imagine now in 2025 that has increased. And so, and the political climate within Halton Region matches the affluent community. And so when homelessness is seen on the streets and tents are popping up, residents want us to do something about it, and they're very vocal about how they feel about this very affluent community now seeing homelessness. And it's really important to understand that prior to COVID, within the region of Halton, homelessness was very hidden, and so it definitely exists. I mean, we've been doing this work for decades, so it definitely existed. But it was hidden. So you didn't really see someone with a pitched tent in a park or someone sleeping on a bench by the beach. Or we've even had occasions where someone's on their morning run and they've seen pitched tents now on the beach. And that wasn't very visible prior to the pandemic. However, following the pandemic, the scene of homelessness within Halton Region drastically changed, and we're now starting to see the very real issue of homelessness within our communities, and that became very nerve-wracking for a lot of our residents, and the political climate was very tense. And so we very quickly recognized that we needed to now be very overt with our work in homelessness, and work collaboratively within the region, within our regional, with regional partners to address the very real issue. And also just to give you a little deeper understanding of the rental market, I think how insane the rental market is not unknown to anyone sitting in this room or attending this conference. But our average market rent for a 1-bedroom unit is $2,200 at this time. I heard a what? That's awesome. I was really hoping for that reaction, because that's truly how ridiculous it is. So as you can imagine, if you're on any kind of social assistance, that's way out of your reach. And so here today, we really want to emphasize how we've come together as a community to address these very real concerns. So homelessness in our communities, as I mentioned before, definitely on the rise since the pandemic. And as we can see from the first graph, there's been a notable rise, and the trends reflect the increasing visibility of homelessness and the growing number of individuals who are unable to access or maintain stable housing. In the second graph, what we're able to see is the point in time count from 2021, 2023, and 2024. Is that what that says up there? And what our point in time count has shown is that 35% have reported that eviction was the reason for their most recent housing loss. And the proportion of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness increased significantly from 2% in 2021 to 18% in 2024. And 84% of our respondents identified low income as a barrier to finding housing, while 77% cited high rent costs as a major challenge. So together, these findings underscore how housing affordability, income insecurity, and eviction pressures are driving the rise in homelessness and encampments. They emphasize the importance of collaborative data-informed strategies to prevent homelessness and to support pathways to stable housing. So the data is there, we know the issue is there, our region, our residents, our businesses, they're all recognizing that the issue is there. And so now the pressure's on us. What are you doing about this? And so when we started this work in early 2023, it was actually Halton Region Police Services who approached us to begin this work within the community. And we hung on to them for dear life to guide us in how to do this. Because although we were working with homeless folks and those who are unsheltered and within the shelter system for quite some time, this was also new to us. And we also wanted to approach encampments in the most compassionate way possible. And partnering with Halton Regional Police Services, who really led this collaboration, helped us to shape the way that we wanted to work within our communities. So because of the very real wealth gap within Halton, we understand that 10% of earners make about 9 times more than the bottom 10%. And even back in 2012, the richest 20% were taking home 43% of the after-tax income, while the poorest 20% were left with just 6%. This is within Halton Region, according to Stats Canada. And so since then, rising costs, especially housing and inflation, have only widened that gap. And with the pandemic-related supports programs ending, we're now seeing a noticeable rise in poverty across the region. So, like I said, whenever encampments are popping up, fingers are being pointed. People are very angry. They don't know what to do. They're very disturbed that their tax dollars are not being used appropriately. Lots of comments. I think our inboxes were full all the time in asking us how we're going to address the issue.
So we'll go into a little bit of detail about our regional encampment response. So this was kind of a document that we created collaboratively. There we go. So we created this document collaboratively with Halton Region, HRPS, our local municipalities, and agency partners, and this was done through the Community Safety Wellbeing Table. And what this document does is it helps us to provide clear role definitions for partners and outlines a clear escalation process. So the staff involved have access to the contact information they need, whether it's regional liaisons or police, et cetera. And it also importantly establishes that any encampment removals must follow the legal principles that are in place, as well as human service best practices. And ultimately, any enforcement or removal decisions are going to be made by the property owner, which for us sometimes is like our cities and towns, but also sometimes as private property owners as well. And following this encampment response document, there were further standard operating procedures that our municipalities also created. And these SOPs were really designed to fit within our framework, but also to have a greater focus on their own risk assessments, enforcement best practices, and just ensuring that between all these cities, we were really consistent as well across Halton. So these images just show a little bit of data, just more specifically about our encampments. So far in 2025, our outreach team has received over 350 requests for outreach/encampment reports. These reports are usually received from the police, from citizens. If any of our municipalities have like an online ticket where people can write in, that's usually how we get these. I think important to note, these are not 350 individual encampment locations. It's just 350 communications we've received from our community about the encampments that are existing. And in 2024, last year, we received 486 reports over the year. And this was a really big increase from 2023. We got over 321 more reports than we did in 2023. And so these numbers really just are reflecting a rise both in encampments and also community awareness and just that engagement with reporting concerns. I think it took folks some time to know like who to call and how to get it on our desk, but they know now. So our team also does a really excellent job of responding to these reports and doing so quickly and, of course, compassionately. So we make a point of listening to residents, whether it's business owners, people in the neighborhood, and just ensuring that they feel heard and informed. A lot of our process is about like updating these folks when things have escalated. And so when reports come in, our outreach team is promptly dispatched and we'll follow up with residents just to let them know, our team's been out there, this is what we've offered. And we found that this approach really helps us to just build trust and strengthen those relationships between our community through our outreach team. And folks, I think, have a better understanding of what's actually going on and really what support is actually out there. So just to focus on some of the trends that we've seen over time. So on average, we're getting about 40 reports a month. And we noticed last year the busiest months were April, October, November. I think that's just aligning with seasonal changes. So as the weather changes, sometimes folks are moving in and out of shelter or maybe just moving in and out of more noticeable areas. And another trend that we noticed really between 2023 and 2024 was an increase of encampments on Metrolinx land near their GO stations and stuff like that. I think for other regions in Ontario, that might be a trend across different areas. But what this did for us was it opened up the door for us to build a really strong and open relationship with Metrolinx and having them kind of see things through our perspective and have a little bit more partnership there. And so we were able to expand our approach and reinforce that commitment to preserving human rights, but in these unique settings. And so overall, these numbers are really just highlighting an ongoing and growing demand for our outreach support specifically, but also the importance of having those sustained, coordinated efforts, bringing the police in where we can, and just planning, especially when it's a high demand period. So this is just a little bit more about our actual response framework and kind of how that's set up. So really the beginning of the process is when an encampment is reported to us and then identified. So our team goes out there, we're seeing either, yes, this was an encampment, or maybe no, it wasn't. And if we've determined that it is, that's kind of what starts the process. So that could be through outreach visiting, could be through HRPS, it could be sometimes a joint visit. And really what my team is doing is we're going out there, we're documenting the important details. Did we offer shelter? Was shelter refused? Is the site growing? And any health and safety concerns that are notable. The outcome of that visit will then be shared with the municipality or private property owner. And ultimately, again, enforcement is their decision. And they'll be following, if it's the municipality, they'll have their own SOP. But meanwhile, our outreach team is still continuing to connect and support these folks. That might mean showing up at the time of enforcement to make sure that we're offering shelter, giving them resources, but also in cases where enforcement is not happening or not happening right away, we have a little bit more time to consistently be offering support, being out there and kind of doing that piece of things on the human service side. And then, ultimately, any municipalities can and will make their own enforcement decisions.
So navigating some of the legal terrain. So in January 2023, we had the Waterloo ruling, which found the Superior Court ruled that the Region of Waterloo attempting to evict residents of an encampment violated their charter rights, specifically Section 7 pertaining to rights of life, liberty, and security. The court emphasized that municipalities cannot enforce anti-encampment bylaws when shelter spaces are full or inaccessible. This set a precedence for Ontario as well as Canada. So we have the Safer Municipalities Act. So in December 2024, the Ontario government introduced Safe Municipalities Act to provide municipalities new enforcement tools, including changes to the Trespass to Property Act, allowing courts to consider aggravating factors like repeated trespassing and likelihood of future offenses. So Bill 6 in June of 2025 formalized these changes and added the Restricting Public Consumption of Illegal Substances Act. This law empowers officers to direct individuals to stop consuming substances on public property, and this also includes tents that they're using as dwellings on these properties. Non-compliance can result in fines up to $10,000 as well as imprisonment. So despite these new tools, Halton Region still continues to prioritize outreach, support, and housing solutions. Enforcement is only used as a last resort, and we heavily prioritize compassion in our approach.
All right, so moving on, we'll focus a little bit more on, how this policy actually looks in practice. And I think the real focus of that is honestly what the officers are doing. I'll be honest, I don't think my encampment outreach team is doing anything that different to every other encampment outreach team. And, a little bit of backstory, when I came into my role previously as a supervisor of this team, I knew that there was this partnership with the police and it was growing, very new at the time. And I was very uncertain. I didn't think that it would be positive. I knew that the folks we're serving have such a negative impression and in some cases, real negative experience with police officers that I thought it would be something that would hold us back and really prohibit us from being able to support folks when the police were involved. But I was very pleasantly surprised. Very surprised, I should say. But the wonderful work that they do, I think, is really what makes this partnership really unique. And so their bureau, the Community Mobilization Bureau, are police officers who've dedicated their efforts to apply a human rights approach to working with anyone in our community, and specifically for our purposes, the unsheltered folks. And some of the things that they're focused on are supporting these vulnerable populations in different and creative ways. Having really frequent communication, building that rapport with our unsheltered population. They're breaking stereotypes. They're not really fitting that mold of policing that folks are used to, and they're just really reinforcing those positive connections that are really important. Going back to kind of how this started, they did some really practical stuff, such as having naloxone with them, snack packs, hygiene bags, things that our folks in the community actually needed, and they were out there providing those things, sometimes with us, but also sometimes without us. They were just out in the community doing that on their own. They're also incredibly educated on the homelessness response system, specifically in Halton. So when they are out there on their own, they know the resources, they can target that support for folks and get them, whether it's through referrals or through calling the shelter, they can get them the support they actually need. Something we'll get into later is they've also been able to support in kind of unique situations, including, after some of our folks secure housing and there's some weird odds and ends that need tied up, they've been really helpful there. We do a weekly ride along with our outreach team with the police. So we're going out together, visiting encampments that are new, visiting encampments that are known to us, and just having that ongoing presence as a unit kind of in the community. And this is really important, I think, for my outreach team, just because sometimes with the work we do in encampments, occasionally there are safety concerns. And of course, as a manager, I tell my staff, if you don't feel safe, don't keep going, turn around and we'll come back another day. And I think having that ongoing ride along with the police always gives us that setting to have a way that we can return with a little bit more reinforcement and feel a bit more protected going into a situation that might be, a little bit unknown otherwise. And so these are just some of the ways that they support our team. And then finally, they're involved in ongoing training to kind of further their knowledge and sensitivity. Most importantly, I think, by attending this conference. So.
Okay, so back when Dylan and I started in the Community Mobilization Unit in September 2023, there was already an established model of CMB and Halton Housing Help partnership already in place. So this model was for officers to approach the unhoused from a position of compassion and respect. We realize that those experiencing homelessness are very often victims of social issues that really require true collaboration to solve. So key to us is always establishing a rapport with the unhoused. Because without a rapport, we can't start that essential conversation that we need to have with them. And this is regardless as to whether we're with Halton Housing Help or not. We do the weekly ride-alongs, but Dylan and I are out there sort of 5 days a week. Our patrol officers are out there 24/7. And they know that we're the ones to come to if they need additional information about the shelter that's available, or anybody has questions. And it's kind of constantly, the information is constantly coming from the road to us, and then we're constantly communicating with Halton Housing Help. So in order to kind of get that rapport with everybody that we were coming into contact with on the road, we experimented first of all with just going out in plain clothes. We still have to carry our use of force, though. So we were still wearing our vests, and we still had our use of force with us. So as we kind of got to know more people out there on the street, we felt that it was okay for us to go back into full uniform, but this time we had the community officer flashes on the front of our vests as opposed to just the police. So that sort of distinguishes us from the patrol officers. And one reason for that was because the community needed to see us in uniform out there speaking with people on the street and working obviously in partnership too. We also worked with our church partners in order to create snack packs. So water, like applesauce, chips, that type of stuff. And actually, we have received feedback from the people we've been giving them to, they'll say, those granola bars you gave us were too difficult with our teeth. So, you need to put something softer in there, right? So we're getting feedback from them. We pass that on to the churches, and then they give us new improved snack packs. Also, we were giving out hygiene packs as well. We carry naloxone all the time with us, and we're giving those out. Most importantly for us from a police perspective is that we're not there for enforcement. So our question is not, does this person have a warrant? It's, does this person need shelter? And how can we get them that shelter? And then lastly, enforcement, it's our last resort, but we'll talk about that more on going forward. So what Halton Regional Police does in a nutshell, you've heard that we do our weekly ride-alongs. However, as I've mentioned, there is always constant communication. We will speak with Laura, we will speak with Kristen numerous times in a day sometimes. It's, that communication is ongoing. We're also engaged in shelter support. We, alongside with the outreach, we help identify storage options, ensuring that clients actually are able to leave that encampment because they know their possessions, which are obviously very important to them, are going to be stored somewhere safe. Because absolutely, if you don't have any storage for them to put their belongings, they're not going to leave. They're not going to go, okay? So you have to set them up for success, okay? No storage is going to be a barrier, definitely. The benefit of us being kind of like a conduit between the patrol officers and Halton Housing Help is that information is always coming to us from the patrol officers as to people they've seen while they're out there who are maybe experiencing mental health crisis or who need help with addictions. Specifically, we can then make referrals to our community safety and wellbeing situation table, which Laura sits on. That's weekly. We also have a dedicated HRPS social worker in each of our 3 districts. So any reports that are done involving the unhoused go straight to the social worker. And we have 2 people who are known as complex service navigators. And they are like gold in our organization because both of them have extensive experience in mental health support. And so as soon as we identify this particular person who's in need, and often these people are creating an awful lot of calls for service for us. And, patrol officers are kind of getting tired because they're constantly having to go see this person. So we need to look at how can we, wrap those supports around those people and how can we find a solution? Over to you, Laura.
Right. So at the core of kind of our encampment response system, it's not just us. There's lots of other agencies involved as well. And it really is a strong collaboration that we put in. So you'll see on the right-hand side there, we have a crisis team, community health center, it's a mobile van, as well as, a team of physicians and nurse practitioners that get out in the community. We have addiction support. My team is Halton Housing Help. We have our housing-focused outreach team for encampments, harm reduction, and also our peer encampment engagement through Community Development Halton. So there's lots of agencies involved that are all kind of stepping in wherever they can and where needed to support our folks that are unsheltered. And kind of to keep these efforts coordinated, we've really built lots of layers of communication. We'll have regular roundtable discussions so that we can bring all those stakeholders together and make sure that our processes are aligned. We can also do more ad hoc meetings when there's a situation that requires a bit more of an urgent response. And we also have a centralized reporting system, which is going to help us ensure that all these municipal ports are triaged consistently. And then finally, we have weekly meetings with myself and our shelter managers so that our outreach team knows the situation. Like when we're having folks that want to access shelter, we know what the vacancy looks like. We know where folks are going to be headed. And that way we can kind of even have a chance to bring some folks up that maybe they're not accepting shelter now, but in a couple days they might, or the cold weather is coming and we know that these seasonal changes might bring that change. And then when needed, we also can put together more specialized teams just for a more targeted response. And we've really found this coordinated, multi-partner approach is what's made a real difference in how we're supporting both the unhoused, but also our housed residents, because I think having that feedback for citizens that are maybe noticing this rise in homelessness and having them, I guess, be assured that the support is there and that it's being utilized is really important for us as well.
So as police, in addition to supporting those who are unhoused, we have an obligation to listen to community voices. And when we say community voices, we're talking about business owners and we're talking about residents that live in Halton Region. Increasingly, we are finding that residents of Halton Region are losing patience with encampments. They're losing patience with seeing people panhandling at all the major intersections and the use of illegal drugs in public spaces. So even though enforcement is always our last resort, so far, 100% of property owners have been willing to listen to us when we explain the encampment process. So we explain to them, it's your land, you're the owner. You can issue a trespass notice to these people who are on your land, and you can designate us as your agents to enforce the notice. However, we ask them to give us time so that we can notify Halton Housing Help, so they can dispatch outreach workers first. And then due to our involvement and advice, outreach workers are sometimes given extensive time to arrange shelter and storage options. And I really feel like this is where the benefit of us is, myself and Dylan, like the Community Mobilization Bureau. You would not get that same level of service from patrol. Okay, that it's important that business owners can connect to us directly because we have great links to Halton Housing Help. We have a lot of knowledge about who is out there in our community unhoused, okay? And we have that rapport that's established already. So, they'll come to us and say, we need you to help us with this person. And we're like, done. Okay, we take care of it. So a good example of that would be one at the end of 2024, December 2024, we had the Hydro One security specialist come to us about a 2-person encampment that was on their land. We knew the individuals there because they'd already been in different sites around our city, the city of Burlington. So we did frequent visits, just talking to them, explaining, wouldn't this be better? How can we work this so that this is better for you? And Hydro One were extremely patient. And so it was significant that Christmas was in the middle of this. We didn't want to sort of kick them out or have any kind of upheaval over the holiday season. So we left it there. We came back in January, talked to them again. And we were able to resolve that situation in a good way. And Dylan's going to speak about one of those people later on that we moved from that site into successful shelter of his own.
Something I'll add too, I think that I forgot to mention earlier, just kind of on those outcomes, is over the last year and a half, we've had 27 encampments that were issued a trespass notice, but we've had 99 that were resolved through voluntary relocation. And I think a lot of those sites that had that more positive outcome is really just due to kind of the trust that the community has in us, that we will kind of take a little bit of extra time and have a more positive outcome, whether it's getting folks into shelter, exploring other options that might be more positive just to get them off the streets. And through that, we aren't seeing as many, forcible removals. There are some, of course, but even in those cases where a trespass notice is issued, I think sometimes even through that, we're able to work with folks. Very rarely is a trespass notice effective immediately. Like we're given a time period, 5 days, 2 weeks, and in that time frame, we're able to really do our work as best as possible. And so even in those situations, we're kind of getting a better outcome than we might have otherwise. So looking more at some outcomes, specifically some of our program data. So our outreach program plays a really vital role in helping residents transition from unsheltered homelessness to, shelter or other options. We're not a necessary step, but I think just the fact that we're out there in the community, a lot of folks are doing so through us. We're helping them call, or we're, doing something in the background to make sure that they're able to make that transition. Since this team started, we've had over 282 individuals that were moved from living outside into the shelter, which I think is just speaking really strongly to that collaboration, specifically between us and our shelter providers. And beyond that, we also have provided our intensive outreach support to 138 people. So this support that we're offering includes case planning. We're really focused on housing, crisis intervention, we're system navigating, we're making referrals to other agencies where appropriate. And most importantly, we're building that trust. I think probably much like our officers, there's lots of folks that don't want to or sometimes refuse to engage with us the first couple times around, but we're able to be out there in the community, have a really consistent presence. And through that, sometimes we have folks who, even if it's in small ways, are willing to open up to us a bit more and, receive some of the services that we're trying to support with. On average, our folks are receiving approximately 93 days of support. But I think it's important to note, we don't really have a time limit. Of course, there are some service expectations, but really most of the time when that case management ends, it's not because we've discharged someone forcibly. But either way, within those 93 days, that's nearly 3 months of really meaningful engagement, which is just reflecting, and we can see those complex barriers that our folks are facing. And we don't simply support with that short-term access to shelter. We work alongside people, whatever their choice is. If they choose to remain unsheltered, the support from my team will continue as long as they are, around still, and as long as they want to work with us, that support is still there. And then on the right side, there's just some more details about that shelter system outflow and kind of what those pathways look like. So 25% of folks that left the shelter were doing so because they were able to secure housing in the private market. And this itself is a strong, indicator of success, especially given our rental pressures in Halton. And then 14% of folks secured housing with support, so some sort of supportive housing environment. And this really reinforces the importance of those supportive housing options and really the need for more of them, because we know that there's folks in the shelter system who have those higher needs, and this is really the outcome that they are waiting for. And then 37% of folks left shelter with their location unknown. So this is a really big gap in our system, and there could be room for improvement for sure in having system tracking and having more tools at our hands to kind of respond to that transient nature of homelessness. And it's something we're definitely working to improve. 13% of folks leaving shelter were actually leaving shelter to return to homelessness. So for us, any percentage of return to homelessness is, of course, really concerning, and it shows where definitely more supports are needed. Some of the partnerships that we do with our shelters is when folks are, whether they're discharging, we know that they left voluntarily, any circumstance. If there's any opportunity to connect our outreach team proactively, immediately at that discharge, that's something we take advantage of as well, to make sure that if there's any chance of catching them before they kind of disappear, that we're doing so. And then finally, we have 11% of folks that over time have remained in shelter, continuing to receive the support. So overall, these outcomes show a lot of progress, but also paired with some really clear challenges in the system. But we do see some tangible results, while also, the valuable feedback of that, as well as we're able to identify where we need to put more effort into, including supportive housing options, different supports, and anything that kind of can increase that long-term stability that we'd like to see. Right, and then kind of from all this information, just digging a bit deeper on some of those more prominent challenges and trends that we've noticed. So firstly, a real big one is shelter system cycling. So folks kind of coming in and out of the shelter over time. And for us, this is a really significant concern because it creates the risk of people returning to unsheltered homelessness when they're leaving the shelter in those periods, or experiencing new crises without support. If folks leave the shelter and aren't interested, or maybe didn't know how to connect with our team, they're not going to be receiving supports through some pretty difficult times. And then it also highlights just the ongoing barriers of maintaining engagement with folks, especially people that are highly transient. And then another challenge from that we see from our outreach discharge data is just the clear pattern of individuals who are cycling not just between unsheltered homelessness and the shelters, but also hospitals and places like that. A lot of folks are maybe emergency room visits or being hospitalized due to some more serious health or mental health concerns. And really that cycle just underscores a persistent housing instability and a really urgent need for more permanent supportive housing options. Secondly, we have limited access to detox programs and deeply affordable housing. And so that further restricts our opportunity to encourage and kind of create those direct to housing placements. And so that itself is leading to repeat shelter use and just poor long-term outcomes. And then on a local level, for us, we've had a bit of struggle with encampment cleanups. Often they're delayed, things might not get cleaned up right away, and it really leads to frustration in our residents. People are not seeing action as quickly as they want. And in some cases, even if the individuals have been removed, but the site, the tent, everything is still there, we've seen situations where it's actually drawn new people to choose this site as where they want to set up. It already has a tent. It might already be nicely set up. And because that cleanup didn't happen, the process can kind of restart. And so that's just creating an additional challenge for our team, enforcement teams, the property owners. And so that's been something on a local level that we've noticed. And then lastly, the final kind of issue that we've noticed is the lack of standard practices across municipalities. And so sometimes it just makes that coordination piece a little bit difficult. But that is something also I would say that our whole region is working on, and hopefully we see some improvement.
So here's one of our success stories. So for the sake of this presentation, we'll call this individual Rob. So Rob became homeless in early 2023, prior to Sarah and I going into the unit. He was known by the officers that were currently in the community mobilization unit. They had a lot of interaction with him up until the time where we came in September. He had an encampment on private property. It was a business, and they were working with him to allow him time to get his belongings out. Long story short, he was kind of cycling through the shelter system a bit, but he always came back. Eventually that business said, we're going to be removing the encampment, and he was moved along. He ended up at one of our encampments in Burlington, which fluctuated between 10 and 15 individuals there. Again, we would visit him frequently. During one of the ride-alongs, he actually disclosed to our Halton housing outreach worker that he was kind of being victimized there. He was being picked on by the other residents. They were stealing his belongings, kind of robbing him at times. They were urinating on his bedding. Chris didn't disclose that to us. We approached Rob about it. He didn't want any police involvement in the sense of any of us getting involved or speaking to the other individuals. He actually disclosed to us that he had found another place that was kind of secluded that he wanted to move to, so we assisted him in getting there. That didn't last too long. These individuals found him there, and he eventually moved on to the Hydro 1 property. So that brings us to about November 2024, so he's almost been 2 years being homeless. Hydro 1 was really receptive with working with us. They gave us approximately 2 months, give or take, before they wanted it cleaned up. And again, over the course of this 2 years, we really tried to encourage Rob to get housing, and he never wanted it for whatever reason. I think it was partly we had some pretty bad weather. In Burlington, we had a lot of snow, and all of a sudden Rob was open to getting a unit. So we immediately contacted our resources, who began working that day. And Sarah and I were probably going down there every day, following up, making sure, hey, we already have a viewing tomorrow. Yep, I'm going to be ready, everything. So eventually he secured a unit. It was right on the right, it's a basement apartment. But one of the obstacles that he started talking about was he didn't want to leave his belongings. And he had a lot of belongings there. And then it was kind of becoming a barrier that we were concerned that he may not follow up with this. So Sarah and I spoke to our bosses, and we have a pickup truck at our service, and we got approval to use the pickup truck to move him in. So we had him move all of his belongings that he wanted to keep aside, and we spent the morning basically making trips with the pickup truck, moving him into his unit. And we still see Rob all the time. We specifically drive by when we're in the area. That picture on the right, he's got a dog. We drove by, he was walking the dog. We stopped and talked to him, and we regularly follow up and see him. He's doing really well. So,
Sorry, I just would really like to emphasize here that this was Halton Region Police doing this amazing work of supporting an encampment resident to A, move locations and find a different encampment. Where have you heard of that? And B, support this individual once he was finally ready for housing to move into housing. Where have you heard of that? So this speaks to the level of collaboration that we've created here.
Yeah, I will add to what Faiza was speaking about. Just this individual specifically, I think our team knew him over this course as well. And I don't think he was super receptive to police involvement originally. It's an attitude lots of us are probably familiar with if you work with unsheltered folks. But over time, the rapport that they built, like even when, my supervisor for our team, Kristen, was out in the community, he would ask, how's Sarah doing? How's Dylan doing? I haven't seen them in a few days. Like that level of just real care amongst these individuals and our team. It was really, really wonderful to see and quite surprising to me. Like I would have never expected that. And I'm sure some people in this room might have that same feeling. So as we look ahead, there are some kind of important ideas and things that we want to just highlight here, and really to put the focus on our goal, which is to build communities that are safer and more inclusive for everyone. So we'll continue ongoing initiatives like our outreach, our partnership with the shelters, while also enhancing any community engagement we can through collaboration, open dialogue. On the policy side, we're definitely working towards frameworks that are kind of just striking the right balance, and we're protecting the dignity and the rights of our unhoused residents while also addressing, safety concerns, community concerns from folks in our community. So for us, the goal is long-term, sustainable solutions that are going to bring people together rather than divide them. All right, so that's everything for our presentation, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Halton Region. Absolutely amazing collaboration and work there between Halton Region and their local policing department. Definitely a model that can be scaled across Canada in some cases. So we're going to go to questions. We have a microphone in the room. Our gentleman down here is going to walk around with it. So if you have questions, raise your hand and just wait for the microphone to reach you. Perfect.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your presentation today. I wondered if you could tell us how many homeless people there are in Halton. How many of them are in encampments, and how many shelter beds Halton has? Thank you.
I'll take this one. So I think you can speak to the encampment numbers, or I'll speak to the shelter portion of the question. We have 2 shelters in the region of Halton. 4 municipalities, 2 shelters, 1 for single men and 1 for families and single women who are not fleeing domestic violence. And within the physical shelter locations for men, there are currently 34 beds. Annie, am I wrong? Yes, I'm wrong. Oh no, I'm right. 34 beds, and then we have an offsite location that we use for when we're at capacity, which is a hotel that we use when we're at capacity. And then our family shelter is a bed. It has 43 rooms. 43 rooms, and those rooms are for, like I said, families and single women. And then we use offsite hotels for when we're at capacity on site.
And then speaking, I guess, to the unsheltered piece. So this number is always changing, but I think, just from my team and the folks that we're supporting on average, like we might have between 30 and 40 folks that we're supporting, but it changes all throughout the year. And I think as winter comes, we see those numbers dip as more folks are kind of accessing shelter.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. I actually work outreach through the city of Kawartha Lake, so it was very interesting to hear, especially about your encampments, because we have encampments allowed on municipal property this year for the first time ever, so very interesting stuff. My question is to do with Rob. How did that, what kind of unit? Like, how did he have money for that? Was it a private unit? Like, how did that happen so quickly?
So we're really lucky, I think, in Halton Region to have some subsidy programs. And so the one that he ended up utilizing was one that was kind of earmarked for folks that were actively experiencing homelessness, whether it was through encampment or folks in the shelter system. So that was something that was available to him for quite some time, honestly. And it was, despite that availability for this financial help to secure housing, which to your point is absolutely necessary if you're on social assistance, or even for some folks that might work with rent being as high as it is, you probably need a little something. And so we were kind of just waiting for him to want to kind of tackle housing as a goal for us to support him. Now, the subsidy is only one piece of it. Like, the other half is going to viewings and finding landlords who will even give you a viewing, but then also who will see your client's application and their income source, their credit score, and who will approve them. So all of those steps, I think we got a little lucky, just the way that the timeline worked out really well. But to answer your question, it was strictly through subsidy that he was able to afford housing 100%.
I'm going to add to that. I don't think it's luck. I think it's very strategic in the way that we're housing folks because of the level of collaboration that we have. And so when we are working with our unsheltered folks, or even those who are sheltered, and because of their income, their credit score, and all the barriers that Laura has mentioned, we show up and we say, this is how this individual is going to be supported. And this is what we're going to do to stay connected, to make sure that your rent is paid, and that this individual in this unit is going to maintain the unit. And because we're constantly showing up for the folks that we're housing in a very collaborative way with the number of different agencies that we have, we're finding more success. So it may have been that for Rob's stars aligned, but there's a lot of work that goes behind all of that to make sure that the stars are aligned.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. You guys are clearly doing some amazing work. My question is about the voluntary relocation that you spoke about. One of the challenges we're having in our community is when we are receiving requests to dismantle encampments. One of our barriers is that we can't really tell people where they can set up, so that, they're going to be left alone, and, aside from the support services, obviously. So it's almost like a leaf blowing effect, right? Where your people keep on setting up where they're not wanted, and then they're always being asked to relocate. So I'm wondering, when you're talking about voluntary relocation, how are you guys managing that, and have you come up with a solution where we're able to suggest potentially locations where people can set up if there are no shelter beds available and nowhere else for them to go?
So I think that's something my team has to be really careful about, because I think at a high level, we're not in the business of telling people where they should set up their encampment, because I think that would bring its own difficulties. But kind of how we tackle this when it's happening is we let the person know this location, whether it's private property, whether it's, municipal property. Sometimes the specifics of the location are really the reason why there might be that pressure for them to move. And so through that information that we'll share with someone, maybe it was too close to a school, maybe it was somewhere that was interfering with public use, maybe it was private property, and that owner, they don't need a reason if it's private property to just tell that person to leave. And so when we're sharing that information with folks, I think sometimes they might take it upon themselves to, okay, this site didn't work because of XYZ. I'm going to go somewhere that's completely different. Maybe it's more hidden, it's more secluded, it's not bothering anybody. We're not supporting or in dissupport of where they might move to, but we see it as a resolution still, because the site that they were at that had, a bit of pressure from the owners, they did leave that location. Some folks will also leave to shelter. I think, that pressure of knowing that they might be having their items removed, that there's this trespass notice coming into effect. I think some folks, that might be a turning point for them to be willing to accept shelter. It doesn't mean they're going to stay in shelter. We've had a fair number of folks that might go for a night or a week, and it's not long lived, but sometimes that's an outcome as well that we can hope for. But it's a tricky situation. Like, I think we've definitely had folks, okay, well, where should I go? And we're not really in a place to say, because theoretically there is no space that would never end up in some sort of response from the owners, but we'll do a good job at least letting them know, like, this is why this location isn't the right place for you, and we'll leave it to them pretty much at that point.
I think I can add to that. I'm so sorry. I apologize. You stood up and everything. I'm so sorry. But I think I can. I think I can add to that just a little bit. I think one of the reasons that the voluntary relocation piece really works, and we don't have to provide. So the police officers don't have to provide the trespass orders as much, is because our goal really is, when we're first interacting with folks who are living in encampments, is not to say, you're not supposed to be here, get out of here. It really is to say, hey, what's going on and how can we help? We want to build rapport. And because we constantly show up to build rapport and to build that relationship, a trust starts to be built. And that's not just with one team or one member of the panel. They're doing it day in and day out together. They're on the same page about that, about building the rapport first. That's essential. And I think that's key to wanting to encourage them to trust us. We're here for you. We don't have an agenda. We really want to work with you. And because we start to build that rapport and strengthen that relationship and build that trust, the voluntary relocation happens to eventually, in Rob's case, as an example, where it's like, yeah, I'm ready for housing. Let's look at some housing options. Or yeah, I'm ready for shelter. Let's look at some shelter options. And that's our goal. That's our goal. We want to bring you off the streets, but we want to work with you to bring you off the streets. It's not on our terms, it's on your terms. And so how can we make that happen?
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple questions, but the first one is, I understand that, good communication and partnership seems to be important. And my first question would be is if the people that living in encampment have strong voices about what they want, what kind of support they want, because we're talking about shelters and housing, but we know a lot of time those shelters and housing are not available. And for example, when you're talking about consuming in the street and publicly, there's this pretty known measure in Canada, like open, safe consumption site and so on, near those places. So basically, what are the voices of the people that live in encampment in your strategy and partnership?
So something that our region actually has started probably almost 2 years ago, and it's a shame that this presentation was yesterday. I would tell you guys all to go to it, but we have an agency called Community Development Halton, and they've actually been doing a research project over the last 2 years, basically on the voices of lived experience. They are connecting with folks with current and past experience of homelessness. They're connecting with our unsheltered folks, our folks in the shelter, and really what they're looking to do is to create a lot of, materials from this research project that will help us to inform, everything from larger policies that are going to change things in a big way to just even, our staff on the front line. Something we've spoke about is having some training from people with lived experience to kind of inform our staff most appropriately on how can we be most compassionate, most intentional with our services. I think also a lot of our services are client-led and client-directed. So whoever the caseworker is, from whether it's housing or a mental health worker, we're not forcing outcomes on somebody. We're asking this individual, what can we help you with? We're not doing anything that they're not consenting and a part of, which I think makes a really big difference in having not only good rapport, but also when you do have chances at outcomes, it's something that the client might be more inclined to follow through with because it's what they wanted in the first place. And so there's a really big focus on that, everything from like filling out our housing applications and letting folks have complete autonomy over what they want to be on the wait list for and what they want to be considered for. And also something that's sometimes hard is taking no for an answer. Like we've had folks turn down a housing opportunity that they could literally move into in a few days or a few weeks. And folks have told us no. And sometimes it's frustrating, I think, when you want to see that person get an outcome. But a big part of that, I think, is just coming to terms like this isn't the outcome they want. And so when people are telling us no, we have to just, accept that and just pivot. If this isn't what fits, what does fit? And let's work with you to find that.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the amazing presentation. I'm Michelle, and I'm from Nellis, the women's shelter in Toronto. I have two questions for the panelists today. The first one is that I'm just wondering how long is the process once you receive the call that an encampment has been found until they are finally placed in wherever, like the shelter or the transitional housing or some different housing options. How long does it take? And in the meantime, let's say if the emergency shelter is full, so what kind of housing options can they find in this transition period? Because right now in Toronto, we all know that even though you want to place an individual in a shelter, but they still have to wait, and then the time actually is unpredictable. So I'm just wondering what other options do they have? And the second question is that I know that in Toronto, for the shelter, most of them for the morning or afternoon, they have to be being kicked out. They have to figure it out by themselves. They can only return to the shelter at nights to stay. So actually, many of them, they just feel like it's not helpful at all. And turn out they just return to homeless and return to the return to the encampments. So I'm also wondering in your region, how do you handle about this? Or when you're facing this kind of difficulties, how do you react from this? Yes, thank you very much.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, you had a question?
No, please, Laura, please.
If I missed something in your question, let me know. But I think first was about that timeline. So our outreach team, our goal is to respond to every report within 2 business days, which we acknowledge is not the best case scenario. Sometimes we're able to mobilize within a few hours, depending on my staff's schedule and what they're doing. But I think I mentioned earlier, we're not the only access to shelter that's available. Folks can call themselves, they can call 311. And so through that, they can technically call at any time and be, brought in to answer kind of on that capacity piece. Because we use the motels, in theory, we're not hitting capacity too frequently. I think sometimes when we have really severe weather where the influx might be overnight with lots of folks calling, we're sometimes in tricky spots, but really we have the capacity to continue to get motel rooms, to increase our capacity with the goal of not turning folks away. And then I think finally on just that daytime piece in the shelter. So our 2 shelters are set up a little bit differently. Our women and family shelter is individual rooms. It's kind of like a old motel style building. So the benefit of that is folks have their own room and there's no rules about you can't be here during the day or anything. There are some expectations, of course, program-wise, but folks have a bit more independence. And through that, I don't think we see folks leaving the shelter, returning to homelessness in the way you described, just because they don't have those expectations during the day. And then for our men's shelter, it's for the on-site shelter, the rooms are more communal with, multiple beds in a bedroom, but there's common spaces as well that are open to the gentlemen during the day. So I think that as well, it helps to reinforce them to just stick around. They can't maybe access their room all day, except, maybe if they needed to grab something, I guess, but they have common spaces, they have resources on site that they're able to stick around and stay for.
So although the response rate from our outreach team is within 24 to 48 hours, and it might seem like a really long time, the really great thing about it is that because they're constantly communicating, this team on the panel, plus others in the room and others on the team, they're constantly communicating. And they understand each other's mandate and they understand each other's roles within the work that we're doing. And so when they're calling each other and they're saying, we've got this issue, we've got this individual, he wants to access shelter, or there's been community complaints, the trust is there between the teams that it's going to be handled. And we don't have to wait for a follow-up. We don't have to call back and say, did you handle that? Because they know it's going to be handled. And it's essential to the work that they're doing. However, the folks, I think a part of your question was, how long does it take to house them? Because it's client driven, it's really dependent on how the client wants to drive that housing factor. So there isn't necessarily a timeline. Sometimes it happens really quickly if they're housing ready, and they're ready to move in, and we've got a unit, because we've got some partnerships in the community. It can happen pretty swiftly and pretty quickly. But other times it might take some time. I mean, we've had some folks in shelter who've been in shelter for over a year, and because they haven't found the right housing, or the income isn't there, or the supports aren't there that they need. So all of our shelters both of our shelters are housing focused. So from the moment that they enter shelter to the moment that they leave, all we're doing is talking about housing. And of course, there's supplementary supports that are involved, and they're acknowledged and they're added and they're there to support the folks, but housing is our goal. And so every conversation you're going to have with your caseworker is going to be about housing. So there's no way that can be missed. And our goal really is to work with the individuals, whether you're in the single men's shelter or the family shelter or the women's shelter. Our goal is to ensure that you're housed and that you're working towards being housed. So what does that look like? You're applying, you're submitting applications, you're connecting with landlords, you're out in the community, you're connecting with your caseworker, all of these little indications to show us that you're actively working towards housing. And of course, it's not going to be that way 100% of the time. And there are folks who are not housing focused within our shelter system. And that's where we start to intensify our supports to ensure that we are doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that you're successful, or that you're recognizing that you have what you need to take that next step towards housing. So the conversation is always very real. It's very active. We try to make it as productive as possible while trying to meet the needs of the clients in the space that they're in. I hope that answers your question.
Hello, my questions relate to how did you develop relationships with hotels? Who pays for those rooms? Are there limits on how many people can stay at the hotel, and what kind of supports are provided to people who are staying at that location?
Excellent question. We've had relationships with hotels from the very beginning. I think so. Very, very early days, the region of Halton didn't have a physical shelter for women and families, and we essentially operated out of hotels. And when the need grew, that's when a building was purchased to convert it into a shelter space for families and single women. However, because the need kept growing, those relationships with hotels was maintained, where all of our overflow goes. And so because we recognize as well that these are businesses, we started to develop multiple relationships with hotels across the region. So that if there are folks in encampments who've expressed a need to want to access shelter, we have the opportunity to say, yes, a bed is available, because we don't want to turn anyone away if they're expressing a need or if they're expressing a want. So our goal is to support that individual as soon as they've expressed the need for shelter. It's helpful when we have these relationships with multiple motels and hotels across the region. And so again, because the need kept growing, there's caseworkers that are involved there. Our outreach teams go in there. Our mobile health clinic team attends on a scheduled rotation. And so there's a lot of support. So the supports within the hotels are similar to the supports of the physical shelter location.
Hello, I'm a Montreal police officer, and I deal with the homeless file here. I have two questions for HRPS.
I just love that everyone turned around to look at you when you said you were a Montreal police officer.
So I have two questions. Number one, do you share data as a police department with other fields? And when you collect, number one. And number two, do you allow tents on public property, sidewalks, And how do you react to that? Because usually the command will come from higher up. It could be city, it could be from the police department itself, or even citizens. So I'm just curious to see how HRPS deals with tents on sidewalks and whatever else public property you have, because you've been talking about green spaces, which is, that's one thing, but when you see other types of locations, that brings other kinds of problematics. Thank you.
Yeah, we do share data. It depends what data, honestly, but we do share some data. When you're talking about tents on public spaces, we are just guided by whoever owns that property. Like I'm not going to act unless I know the owner of that property wants me to act as their agent. Like one example we have right now is we have 2 individuals who have been offered shelter numerous times, and they like to collect belongings. And so wherever they go, it becomes really kind of just chock-a-block with stuff. So that is a problem. And we've been advocating. We've been there lots and lots of times. Halton Housing Help have been there. We're doing our best to try and get them out of that situation because it's owned by the city. And we recognize that there are some safety issues in terms of, fires and whatnot that might occur with them there. But we're not going to do anything unless the city directs us to do something. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. We have had some encampments that have been erected close to sidewalks, major intersections, and they do generate a lot of complaints. We know right away as soon as there's an encampment in a high visible area. And a lot of the times we just go and we have a conversation with them. We explain, look, there's been a lot of attention here. What about relocating to a quieter place? And for the most part, we've had great success with that. They understand, they're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And they end up moving along very quickly, because I remember specifically there's been a few situations, even close to the police station, where they were feet from the sidewalk. And we just go, we have a conversation with them, we get to know them, and we have had very little pushback in terms of those like high visible encampments right on major roadways, basically.
Just going to add something to that. So probably the biggest encampment we had was at the intersection of 2 kind of major highways in Burlington, and it was right across from the mall. So there was a lot of traffic. A lot of people were seeing it. We were there a lot. It was attracting lots of different people. We had a few fires there. During the winter, they were using heating appliances within the tents, so fire attended that. We got to the point where the city was prepared to, issue this trespass notice for the people there. Bylaw primarily are the ones who enforce that. We're just there to support. We were able to, move people along, or they moved kind of voluntarily as well. It was a mix of the two. And then this is the advice that we gave them. I don't know if you guys are CEPTED trained, so Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. That's what CEPTED stands for. We've been trained in that, but it's also useful in other circumstances. So we said to the city, if you want to avoid this becoming another sort of attractive site for people to set up, there's some things that you need to do. So they basically cut down all the brush. They left the higher trees, but they cut down the brush so it wasn't attractive to people because they could be seen so visibly from the road. So we're finding that a very kind of effective way to prevent sort of people reoccupying those kind of sites. Also, we have complaints where people, like the bank lobbies for the ATMs, like after the bank closes, the doors are locked, but the ATMs are accessible to everybody. And then they have people in there who are sleeping or, sometimes urinating, that type of thing. And so we'll do things like saying to them, you need to open this lobby up. It needs to be visible from the outside. So you need to put the brightest lights you can find in there. Maybe you can play some horrendous music so nobody's going to want to hang out there for too long. But, this is what we're doing as the police. We're constantly balancing looking after the unhoused with the interests of the community, and SEPTED is certainly a part of that. So just making those areas a little bit less accessible and interesting for them to be. We've had some success with that.
I think with that large encampment we had across from the mall, it was there for quite a while, and everyone was kind of letting it be. The issue where the city got involved and they wanted to basically evict everyone was there was a large fire. And then fire got called there. They went in. There was multiple propane tanks in tents. There was different apparatuses that they had. There was actually like a homemade wood stove in the one tent. And this is just a regular tent if it catches fire. So that's what really changed the tide there. The fire went in and they said, we can't have this. This is like, we're lucky there wasn't explosions during this fire. So that's, because I'd say it was probably almost there for a year, and we kind of knew everyone and we knew where they were, and we would go and try and do outreach there. But it was really the fire getting involved with a lot of the safety issues that kind of led that encampment getting shut down.
If I can add quickly too, I think some of these like safety concerns, whether it's to personal safety or just community concern, I think a lot of this is getting adopted into the standard operating procedures that our municipalities are creating on their own. And that's what the framework they follow when deciding if and when to enforce. And to Sarah and Dylan's points, like the police are involved once that decision's made. They're not really involved in helping them make that decision. And neither is my team. Like we can inform them about what's going on. Here's what we've helped with. Here's, we visited the site and this happened. So we give them the information, but ultimately that decision is theirs. And if they decide we're moving them today or we're giving them 2 weeks to move, whatever that is, that's where we support them with it, absolutely. But the decision is completely their own.
Thank you so much for both your presentation and your work. I'm a Burlington girl, born and raised, don't live there anymore, but know what you folks are up against in terms of the narrative around homelessness in Halton Region. To your point, it was largely invisible, and I think that I know that I'm still connected to the community and I hear what folks are saying about homelessness. Any tips and tricks, because it sounds like you're doing some really great work with residents, any tips and tricks on sort of like how to get folks on board, how to level up the compassion throughout the community? Thanks.
I think something that has made a difference, honestly, in the last 2 years that I've been doing this work is really in the information that you put out for folks. So if you live in Burlington and you Google, Burlington homelessness, you're looking for somewhere to complain most of the times. The webpage that you get directed to is not really matching that mindset that you might have. Oh, this is a problem. I need to complain. This is horrible. Instead, it's filled with resources and support and, compassionate dialogue. And, the wording is really intentional. Even if you do, email someone or you're calling 311, the response you get is filled with resources. And it's kind of from a standpoint almost of, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for being concerned. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the supports that are available. So it's not really validating. I think some of those angry, pitchfork type of concerns that we see folks having. And that's just the stance I feel that we have to take. And we've been really lucky, even as a region, we have these materials that are really compassionate and really intentional, but also our municipalities have adopted kind of that similar language, similar ideas. And it's always with the focus of, yes, there's an encampment. Thank you for telling us. Here's what we're doing to support that person. And I think that language helps a lot of people. We might not have solved their anger, frankly, but we've at least let them know this is the stance that we have. And so sometimes I think folks know that their anger and their outrage might not always be the place for it. There are still folks that are really,
Yeah. And I think Sarah and I have really good success. A lot of times with these complainants, we'll go down and we'll speak to them. We understand, you don't want them here. You have the right to let them go, but here are the services we can connect them with. If you give us time, we know where they are. We can try and help them. And a lot of people, if you just sit down and have a conversation with them, I don't think we've ever had a situation where they're like, nope, I want them gone today. They work with us and it helps.
Mm-hmm. And we've made sure that we establish good relationships with our BIA, so our Burlington downtown committees. We go to all their mixes. So we're available for the business owners to come and ask us questions. And they will always ask us something that they would never call the police about. But because we're there and they know us and they know that we're trusted, they will ask us. And then we can help them in that way as well. And I think trust is really, really important in this whole situation. The business owners trust that we have their interests at heart, but they also trust us because they know that we're compassionate and we're going to do the right thing.
Hi, my name is Nick. I work for the City of Kelowna in British Columbia, and I supervise our bylaw enforcement team that responds to encampments. And Kelowna has a similar demographic situation to your region, it sounds like. My first question was, Faiza and Laura, do you and your teams, are you employed by the regional municipality? And then a follow-up to that, how did each of you get your senior leadership and your organizations aligned? And can you tell us about that process to get them all on board for the program you're talking about?
So I work with the region of Halton, and Laura works with our outreach team, Halton Housing Help, who's a close partner of the region of Halton. And I had to do no work. Our big boss, who is absolutely amazing, and I am not kissing ass because he's sitting in the crowd, absolutely not. Absolutely fantastic, and he actually drives this work. He is the type of leader that you want to work for because he believes truly that this work is possible, it's doable, and that if we do it right, we can do it right. And because he believes in that, he's got the whole Halton community believing that as well, which is why this partnership works so beautifully. So we had to do nothing to convince him. He probably had to do a lot to convince us. But it works, and because there's trust within our internal teams of the vision and of the goal and what we want to achieve in the long term, we trust that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in the right way.
And I think I'm happy that you shared that you're from bylaw, because I feel that world has such a role in this work as well, and I think maybe where more of that work and maybe convincing is getting these external parties to buy into what we're trying to accomplish as well. Like for us as a region, we have our region, and then there's lots of things that are more municipally led. So all of our cities and towns have their own bylaws, they have their own teams of people. And through that, we saw just, being really honest about what our goal is, what our approach is, empowering them to still make their decisions and supporting their decisions, but also letting them know, like, we're here to do X, Y, Z, and letting them lean on us for that support as well. I think we were able to be more aligned, I'd say, with where we're trying to go in our goals. And we've seen, in some of our municipalities, they include us at beginning of stages of things. And then as things progress, even when they probably didn't need to give us a seat at the table, they have chosen to keep us involved and let us continue to be, influencing or decision makers for some of their, SOPs that they're developing. And that's something that we were really happy to see it, because we thought, as soon as they don't need us anymore, we're probably not going to be involved in this anymore. But we were really surprised that they valued the voice, I think, and they saw the importance of it. And I think they, just like I am with the work they do, they were kind of like, this isn't my job, not my job, but this isn't my expertise. And I want someone here who maybe knows a bit better. And to us, it's the same with their work. Like, we are not bylaw experts or whatever it may be. So we want them for their expertise. And I think through that, we found really good partnership.
Hello. Thank you for just chatting with us and answering our questions today. I was just wondering if Halton had a set definition of what is an encampment. And just to give an example, someone setting up a tent versus someone setting up with a sleeping bag and a door shop are both considered encampments, or is one an encampment because there's a shelter component? And my kind of follow-up question is how are you documenting either the outreach connections? Is that through HIFIS? Are you using other HIFIS modules around encampments and outreach, or other tools that you're using just to help collect that data and share that data for change and different policies and whatnot?
So we define encampment as all of the above. Everything that you just said is an encampment for us. And so we'll work with folks who are in sleeping bags, in a tent, maybe just with their jacket over their bodies, whatever it is for them. It's an encampment for us because they've been there for a while. So these aren't folks who are just using a bench to sleep one night and then they move along. These are folks who are kind of there. You can find them there every night. You can you go the next day and they're there as well. And those are the folks that we're connecting with, and that's considered an encampment for us. And when we started this work, we actually started documenting the map that you saw on our presentation. Laura, you can go back to it. The map that you saw in our presentation that Laura was referring to was through a third-party system that we employed to map all of the encampments that we're seeing within our region, and we did that through a system called Esri. And what that gives us a very real timeline of where encampments are, what's going on with them. All the different colors mean something, and Laura can probably speak more to that. And when an encampment, it gives us notifications of when an encampment is cleaned up, when an encampment is active, if they're open to housing supports or outreach supports, if they're open to working with us, if they're not open to working with us, how many times we've connected with them, how many times we've offered support or offered shelter. All of these things are documented through this one system. And so, and it's separate from our homelessness system, but it correlates because then that information feeds into our homelessness system as well. But this just gives a very real timestamp as to what's going on today.
And I can give a little bit more details on the image on the right. So orange is a site that was active, and then the blue ones of different shades are previous sites. I think the lighter blue is sites that were kind of abandoned, voluntarily relocated. There was no kind of enforcement. And then the ones that are that darker blue are ones that did receive a trespass notice and were removed. So that's kind of a snapshot of, since we started recording this data, all of the encampments. Now, we've only been doing this part of things for about like 18 months or close to 2 years. So this isn't, a lifetime of encampment data, but it's the most relevant recent information.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm really grateful that you're allowing us to dive deep into, one example. I want to piggyback on some of the questions that were asked by my partners in Montreal. So the first question might be a bit sensitive, so feel free. There's a second question, so you can ignore the first one if you want. I was wondering if you've noticed, kind of like we say in French, a typologie, but depending on the type of property owner, of the landowner, different kinds of response in terms of how long they'll be willing to wait, or depending on how resistant they are to giving or not trespass orders. Especially, I'm thinking about like a private owner versus a municipality, for example, and the accountability they have towards citizens, things like that. Mm-hmm. And the second question is about safety. So I know here it's often used as a reason to dismantle. But risks can be mitigated, they can be prevented. So can you speak on that piece, your collaboration with fire department, for example, and the les campeurs, people who are living in the encampments as a group? Do you have protocols to prevent fires and things like that?
I'll let you start first. Yeah.
So we have worked with fire. We've handed out pamphlets and fire prevention, fire safety, just to try and educate people in the encampments. Ultimately, fire does have a lot of power. For that one example, when they went into that one encampment that had caught on fire, they basically said, like, this needs to kind of stop here. A lot of the heating measures that they use in the winter is very dangerous. We had this one individual who had a wood-burning stove, and he had cut a hole in his tent. And I think one time when we were in there trying to locate him, he was sleeping, we cracked his tent. You couldn't even, there was so much ash over him from the open fire that you almost didn't see him at first. Then he's waking up and he's brushing it off. But we do try and do a lot of fire and safety education in the winter months. Sorry, what was the first part of your question? Sorry, Oh yeah, so a lot of the private property owners are pretty good. No, we just had an incident where they worked with us. This was maybe a year ago or so. They had ended up on private property. The property owners were very good with working with us, gave them quite a bit of time. They eventually moved along, relocated. They cleaned it up. A couple weeks ago, we got an email that they were back. We went and we located them. We spoke with them. We spoke with the property owners. They reluctant to work with them again because they had quite a significant cleanup bill. But again, they were pretty good. I think we got like 2 weeks to get them out. We went and spoke with them. Last time I had gone and visit with them prior to them moving, they had buggies filled with items and they were moving along. So even in like kind of aggravating circumstances where they've come back, we find that the property owners are pretty good. And I feel like a lot of the people in our region, at least, they want to help. They do feel bad for these individuals in these circumstances. So I think we're pretty lucky that we live in a region where people are quite understanding.
If I can add something too, I think part of what we try to, I guess, like discuss with property owners, to your point, is kind of the value of letting us do our work and giving us really time more than anything. And, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned like the cost of a cleanup when you do get folks to leave their encampment. And we try to kind of reframe it like, well, what if we could just work with this person and maybe they take some of the stuff with them and your cleanup bill is a bit lower than it would have been if you had to deal with all of this as it was. And I think through that, and even folks, you know, owners that maybe like Metrolinx is a good example where we've had more than one encampment over time on their land. I think they've started to like buy into that value that we add to involving us in the process. And I think through that, we see a little bit of better, more improved outcomes. Like I think especially having the police involved, like sometimes I kind of would imagine that as someone working in the social services and I'm saying, oh, you know, let these people stay here. I don't know if there's that much value when I say it, honestly. However, when the police are involved and they're able to give that new perspective and they're coming from really like a place of more authority, they have a little bit more value maybe to some community members. I think that buy-in from them where they're kind of on the same page as us, I think we see folks be a bit more flexible because of that.
Hi, I'm from Penticton, BC. We have a 40+ person encampment on provincial land. So there's a lot of nuances going on in our community around that. My role represents a couple different sector collaborative groups. One of them being an outreach coordination table, one of them being a lived and living experience table. And as late as yesterday, we have opposing opinions around cleanup around encampments. So specifically, we have outreach teams that want to support in sort of cleaning up a structure that is left behind when somebody is housed. Usually somebody receives housing, we pack up their stuff, and then a structure is left behind. So like wooden structures, tents, the wood burning fireplace, the whole thing. Our outreach team wants to help clean it up. Our lived and living experience table wants to see those structures remain to support other folks that are cold, use that space. And so in my role, I have to listen to a lot of different collective groups. And I'm honestly looking for some advice or some best practices when it comes to cleanup of structures and kind of if you've had any successes or anything you could share on that.
You want to take that one? Oh, sure. Yep. I think Laura mentioned it earlier in our presentation is where she said that they're field experts within our teams. And so I don't know what HRPS knows. Dylan had a whole slide up there with all of the laws up there. I had no idea what he's talking about. I just know what I know. But Dylan knows what he's talking about. And so I'm going to refer to Dylan because he knows what's legal and what's not legal. But he's going to use an approach, a compassionate approach to go to work with the encampment. And I would say in the same way, as Laura mentioned earlier, bylaw knows what bylaw knows. We don't know what bylaw knows. And so what we're going to ask bylaw is give us a little bit of time to work with the individuals who are residing within these encampments so that we can get them access to shelter or move them out of that encampment location. Once they're gone and that encampment is empty, it is 100% up to bylaw how they're going to clean up that location. No other opinion matters because it's not my land, it's not Dylan's land. So it really doesn't matter at that point how that cleanup happens. As long as they're involved, they're a part of the conversation. They've given us the time to make an ethical decision, a human rights decision, a compassionate decision, and they're standing with us to support the encampments. And as long as they've allowed us to do our job, we're now going to allow you to do your job, and that's 100% up to them. So if they want to leave it, good on you. You're just going to invite more folks into that area. But if you're not going to, then how and when you do the cleanup is 100% up to you. Mm-hmm. And I think that within this team, they've been very successful in maintaining those boundaries and not getting involved.
If I can add something, I think an important thing, like if I was dealing with this dilemma, we could call it, I think, knowing that there is this now history of trespass notices, I would almost question, leaving it there, inviting new people to join with maybe imminent risk of further trespasses. Are we kind of setting folks up for failure by, almost having that facade of, yeah, you can come back, but we're going to do the same thing again? Like, I think those nuances, and like if we were dealing with something like this, I think we would be keeping that in mind as well, because we don't want folks to feel comfortable somewhere knowing that they shouldn't be comfortable there because of what's probably going to happen again. And I think in Ontario, we have different, things that are kind of influence us. Like when we are doing encampment removals, it's really important that we have shelter space. And that's kind of like that, as well as the offering of shelter, is really important as like a step one to every decision that's made. But that's all I have to say on that matter.
We are over time. No surprise. Talking to Halton, I think they shut off the mic. Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for attending our session here today. Thank you, Halton, for your amazing work and information sharing here today.
Yeah,